I'm going to be talking about 3 sets of resources. They've already been sent out to the parishes, so the priests have them. But if you're here on behalf of your parish, if you'd like to see it today, I'm going to leave some boxes along there. There's enough for one for every parish, so please don't be greedy, because I was up the other night in another diocese and they ran away with them. So maybe just to start, I'm from Limerick and I married a Cavan woman. And what I find ever since your man, the comedian, anytime I go anywhere, people are mad to tell me Cavan jokes. And last week I was in Holy Cross. I was talking there. So at the breakfast, I was sitting at the table and the man across from me looked at me and he says this to me. He says, "Hi," he says, "what does a cow and calf have in common with the people of Monaghan?" He says, "I don't know, what does a cow and calf have in common with the people of Monaghan?" Oh, he says, "they're both near Cavan." And he roared laughing. And just last night, this is true, I was up in another diocese, and another fella looks across at me, and he says, "Did you hear the one about Pope Francis and the Cavan man?" I says, "No," I says, waiting for the next one to come. He says, "Pope Francis, he says, has a very, very rare blood type, and he needed a transfusion. And the only man they could find that matched his blood was a Cavan man." So the Cavan man at the time, when he was asked, says, "Is there money in this?" And he was told, "Oh, there is indeed." He says, "The Pope is a very generous man. You'll get a big cheque." So that was grand. He got his big cheque anyway. And 6 months later, the Pope needed another transfusion. And the Cavan man says, "Will I get me cheque again?" "Oh, no," says your man. He says, "Since the last transfusion," he says, "the Pope has changed. He's as mean as dyke water now." And of course, your man didn't get it. And he says, he had to tell him 'tis the Cavan blood, he says. Anyway, that's some of them. So I just go on with this, and I was struck by the upbeat nature of what Harry was saying there. And there's a guy, and just. There's an historian, I'm not a historian now, I read this guy anyway, Toynbee's his name, and he was looking at the history of civilizations, like it was a massive study. And one of the things that he found in his study was this, and I have it up there, that civilizations, the great civilizations, arose in response to huge challenges. And creative minorities devised solutions that reoriented their entire society. So it's a very interesting idea. It was precisely the challenge which made the civilization great. And I think that's something as church today we need to hold on to, that we do face massive challenges. And my own sense is, yes, we face a massive challenge in terms of how society has developed, and Pope Francis is very clear on that. The values and the focus on economy, the focus on things instead of people, all of that. But equally, Pope Francis is very strong. We face a challenge of reforming ourselves. It's not about us looking out there in judgment and saying what's wrong with the world. It's also about us recognizing that we need fundamentally to change if we're going to communicate effectively the good news of the gospel. But at any rate, I suppose that's Francis is able to offer a very, very strong challenge to us as church. He's able to point out very, very difficult realities in the world, but at the same time, his heart is convinced that God's Spirit is active and that we as church need to attune ourselves to what God's Spirit is calling us to. So, and just offering that as a kind of a backdrop to what I'll be saying next. There was a study conducted there a couple of years ago by a guy called Tom Inglis, and he was looking at what's really, really important for Irish people. He had just lost his wife. He was very in touch for himself with his own quest, what's the meaning of life, and as a researcher and sociologist, he was interested in finding out for other people. And you see like you might think that money is the most important thing, or a big house or whatever, but what came across very, very strongly, very, very powerfully, is that for ordinary Irish people, family is the core meaning. Loving relationships are absolutely central. And he's not just talking about traditional family types, he's talking about any family type where people experience loving relationships. Where they experience love, it lifts their lives. And where they lose love, it profoundly wounds their lives. So that's quite an interesting, that's a very recent study by Tom Inglis. There, in this month's Intercom and next month's Intercom, there's short synopsis of that, so you might be able to access a copy of that. It's well worth reading, and I think it particularly in this year of the World Meeting of Families, that study would have come out from a source entirely independent of church. In fact, Tom Inglis has been hammering the church for donkey's years, and but I don't think he's doing that out of any vindictiveness. I think he's calling us to a greater authenticity. One of the interesting things that came across from the study was that people, by and large, they do family rather than theorize about it, rather than talk about it. And that's a big challenge for us in church. I remember years ago, and I was reminded from Harry's story there, in the parish I worked in, we tried to engage parents about the faith of their kids and their own faith. So we called them to a meeting about the significance of faith in the lives of their children. And there was hundreds of parents in the parish. And did many come to our meeting? No. About eight parents came in a big town. And and after blaming the parents for ages, we figured maybe what we were doing was wrong. So we went back to anyway, what we ended up with, and I won't go into the detail now, was we invited parents to a celebration of a moment in their lives, in their children's lives, when the children were starting primary school. And it was a religious celebration. And we had the children up on the big screen in the classroom learning how to meditate. The teachers helped us with this. And we had a prayer service where the parents were asked to bless their kids. We had a talk about the significance of religion, and we had a party. And did it come to that? Yeah, 800 parents came to that. So 8 came to a talk about, and 800 came to a celebration of. So what's clear there, and I think it's a big challenge for us in this year as well, is that if I could use the metaphor of the meal and the menu, the parents were very glad to come to a meal. They weren't a bit interested in coming to a meeting about a menu. And that's worth thinking about. Yeah, the experience, not the ideas. And Tom Inglis picked that up in his study. The other thing that's of issue, and it really struck me as significant in the light of what Harry was saying about his story, what Tom Inglis discovered, he asked people all over the country, what's really important to you? And they were saying about family, they were saying about relationships, they were saying about love, and he was probing them for the meaning. He was expecting them to talk religion. And he said they didn't. He says even what he called the Orthodox Catholics, he broke them down into different groups. So the regular Mass-going Catholics, when they were asked about the meanings in their lives, the importance of family, they still didn't talk about faith. Tom didn't access, so somewhere the faith language was buried. But it's interesting, in Harry's story, they did access the faith, but they had to dig for it. Anyway, that's Tom Inglis. And that I think represents a challenge to us. Like how do we communicate effectively, not just through ideas and through conversation, the significance of faith? What kinds of ways can we invite people into experiences, into celebratory moments where the significance of faith dawns on them rather than trying to pump it in through their heads? Pope Francis, I started off with that contrast between the challenge and the response. And it seems to me that Pope Francis is articulating a powerful response to the challenge that we're experiencing today as church. And in his Joy of the Gospel, which he wrote before the Joy of Love, he speaks about two contradictory patterns or two contradictory trends in the world. On the one hand, he's saying people all over the world yearn for love, yearn for dignity, yearn for belonging, yearn for a human life. And Francis says that's God-given, that's the work of the Spirit. That's the Spirit whispering to them about their own dignity and them hearing that and desiring above all else a life that respects their dignity and the dignity of their loved ones. So Francis, you could image that as the cross, the arms of the cross, the popular culture wanting equality and dignity. And then Francis talks about how our global economy is organized, and which essentially says that things are more important than people, that wealth creation, the accumulation of wealth is more important than whether people suffer or not. And he says those two things are at cross purposes. And Francis says the response as church we need to make, and he summarizes it very simply as the church as field hospital. We need to be out there attentive to the wounds that people are experiencing in the world today, the wounds arising from their deepest sense of hope and dignity being violated. And he says it doesn't matter whether they're going to Mass or not. It doesn't even matter whether they're Catholic or not. He says we have a much bigger fish to fry than to be worried about those things. That the good news of the gospel is powerful good news that is directly relevant to the hurts and the hopes of the people today. And our challenge, Francis says, is to be in mission mode out there, especially where there are wounds. And where there are wounds, the metaphor is very apt. It means we have to prioritize. We don't be worried about whether somebody has an ingrown toenail if they have a gaping wound in their body. Do you know? So again, as church, sometimes we get caught up in finicky, tiny little details and miss the bigger picture. And Francis, I'm not going to spend long at this, but I'm moving towards the joy of love. But Francis would say in his joy of the gospel that the core good news is deeply, deeply relevant, that we are loved by God. Now, we take that for granted because, we're faith people and we're all our lives figuring, there is a God and God is love and so on. But the significance of that is extraordinary. And to have that faith, to know in our deepest experience that the God of love exists, that changes everything. That changes everything. And that's the thing that Francis is really focused in on. And how can we share that experience? Because its implications are massive for all our society, that because God is love and because we are made in God's image, we are made to love and to be loved. And the golden calf, that's the metaphor that Francis uses in his the joy of the gospel. The golden calf is the metaphor he uses, from the time the Israelites were in the desert and they worshipped the golden calf. He uses it as a symbol for the extreme consumer values that dominate our planet. And he says that the good news of the gospel is the exact opposite of those values. And the thing as well, and I touched on that earlier, I pick up in the joy of love, in the joy of the gospel, a certain anger, a certain frustration in Pope Francis. Not with the world out there, but with the church in here. He says, we're not mummies in a museum, which is a very powerful metaphor. That we're as if we're trying to preserve things the way they always were, locked away safely. He said, we need to be out in the street. We're not mummies in a museum. And in the joy of the gospel, he identifies some key elements of mission. And again, you may wonder, why am I taking such a broad canvas? I'll get to the joy of love and I'll get to the resources. He says that in order to be effective in mission, and again, you'll hear what this echoes very much what Harry was saying earlier, starting by listening to people. He says you can't possibly share good news with anybody if you have no idea what's going on in their lives, if you're not listening deeply and respectfully to where folk are at, if you're not opening yourselves up to the hurt and the hopes that are deep in their hearts. And he said, before we open our mouth, how we treat people is the most powerful communication we're ever going to make. And if we're there in judgment over people because they're not like us, because they don't go to Mass of a Sunday, or because their marriage isn't what it should be, and so on and so forth, we're already miscommunicating God's love. Now, that doesn't mean for a minute that Francis isn't saying we have a good message to communicate, and I'll come to that. But how we treat people is profoundly important. And then he says two other things that, again, I think are really important: to use faith language that people understand. I think most of the time when we're talking theology, we're talking in a language that the ordinary person doesn't understand. And I find myself at it, and sometimes I'd be saying things, and my mother would be asking me, what am I talking about? Do you know? We can very easily get lost in a language, and I think we've done that in our liturgies. And I think what happened with our liturgies over the last number of years is not a good sign about our sensitivity to the call of the Spirit. But anyway, I don't want to go down that road now. And also what Francis says, which I think is significant, and again I'll be picking up on that here. He says, work with the actual religious practices of people. Francis has respect for the popular religious culture. He'd love if everybody went to Mass every Sunday, but they don't. But they do go to certain things. And in Ireland, we have a massive popular religious culture that's surviving all the changes of the last 30 or 40 years. There'd be rows in parishes at confirmation time. And why is there rows? Because there isn't enough seats allocated to the families. People are mad to get inside the church door for confirmation and for communion. They're mad still to have their children baptised. There'd be big, huge crowds at Christmas. All over the country, churches are crowded for funerals. Blessings of grace. I don't know how many times they've been up and down the country, and there'd be a big pile of cars parked in the middle of nowhere. And then I'd see there's a graveyard there, and there's a blessing. Isn't that true? You know, that people are. And Francis is saying, work with that. Work with that. That's a sign of God's Spirit. There's grace there. There's depth there. There's something going on there. Don't decide on God's behalf that there's nothing going on when people gather, in whatever circumstance, to pray. So that's background, and I just want to go on and talk briefly about the programs and I'll be tapping into the rationale, and then I'll shut up and just watch now what my time is. Okay, so the basic framework we're working with is there is a World Meeting of Families coming up next year, and if you haven't seen what a World Meeting of Families looks like, you can actually there's videos online now at the World. Just if you tap in World Meeting of Families or World Meeting 2018, or if you tap in Amoris, you'll get the website, and on the website you'll see a short video of the last World Meeting. I was going to show that here, but we don't have time. But it's just interesting to watch that. So that'll come. There'll be 30,000 people from all over the world gathering here. There'll be big crowds of Irish people. There'll be a big 3 or 4 days of workshops on family. And bear in mind what I was saying, you know, it's to see what lasting value the workshops will generate, but maybe they will. There will also be a day of festival of families, and there'll be a Mass. And please God, Francis himself will be here for that. So it'll be a big moment. But Francis will come and he'll go, and the 30,000 people will come and they'll go. And the purpose of the resource materials that we have here is not really in view of the World Meeting of Families at all. It's with a view to creating a legacy. There's a very significant document in the Irish Church called Share the Good News, which outlines a vision for the decade ahead in terms of adult faith formation, ongoing faith formation. And I would see that our efforts in that regard fit in under that category, that it's an effort at stimulating adult faith development at a propitious moment. You know, it's a popular moment. There's an opportunity to do things in the parishes the next year, which otherwise we wouldn't have. So that's the legacy. And there are three programs that I just want to introduce to you briefly, three resource booklets. They're published, they're in hard copy. A copy's already out in your parish that were posted to the priest in the last week. And I have copies here, and when I shut up, I'll have them down by the side there. And I'd encourage you, if you have a role in your parish, or if you think you'll be involved in leading a program, if you want just to get your hands and just see what the booklets look like, just take the opportunity in a few minutes. So there are two kind of programs that are available to run in the parish. One is called Practical Initiatives for Popular Moments, and the other is called Parish Conversations. And the Parish Conversations is a standard kind of adult education, adult religious education program. It's in 6 sessions that run for about an hour and a half, and it's envisaged it can be run in the parish. And those are the 6 topics. It just picks up on what Francis is saying in The Joy of Love. You can see there the reality of family life, the Christian vision for the family, God's dream for love, married love growing to maturity, God's mercy, and a gospel of hope. And what Francis combines in his document are 2 things. He's absolutely clear that no one is excluded by God's love, and therefore no one should be excluded by the church. So whatever their situation, whether they're gay, whether they're divorced, whatever they are part of God's love, and they need to be part of our love. And at the very same time, and this is not a contradiction, Francis is saying that in our tradition we have an extraordinary vision for what love can be like, what marriage can be like, what family can be like. And we have a reservoir, if you like, of emotionally intelligent ways of relating, going right back to Paul's, that lovely letter, love is patient, love is kind, and so on. So anyway, Francis explores all that. And his very strong sense is there is a gift there for everybody. Because nothing is more important, and we know that in our own experience, nothing is more important to people than family and how family is getting on. And whether they're faith people or not, if there was something that would help their family to survive, that is relevant to them. And Francis is very, I'd say he's even pained that we have such a legacy, such a beautiful message, such a powerful set of practices that we could share with people. But however we've managed it over the centuries and over the recent decades, we're not communicating very effectively to a lot of people. So, sorry. Now, the program is put in a fairly simple format. There's a video backup with the program. So it actually has the 6 sessions are in this cover. It just says, how you turn on the video here. Here is the first small group discussion. Here are the questions and so on. So it's all there, and the background information, and the information, some resources for facilitating small group discussions. So, but it starts every time. What's the experience of the people? And at the minute that part is being produced, this program won't be ready in full form until after Christmas. The published version is already ready, but the video backup won't be ready until after Christmas. So it's a vox pop of ordinary people, all sorts of people, talking about their experience of life, talking about their experience of family, and then there's an opportunity for people in the program, in the parish hall or wherever it is, to talk about their experience. So starting with people's lives. And then it goes on to a second video clip, and this time it's somebody talking about, what does Francis have to say about that? So the video clip is shown, and then there's an opportunity for a conversation again. And the purpose of the conversation is not to convince people, you're wrong, Francis is right. It's to provide a respectful space where there can be a conversation about what Francis is saying. So that's one resource. And what most dioceses are tending towards is running that as a Lenten program. And the idea is normally there's an announcement 6 months in advance of when Francis is going anywhere. So February, a big announcement, Francis is coming. And then the parish is ready to roll and say, March, here's a program about Francis. He's asked us to have a conversation about the joy of love, and here's a chance. And it'll be on such and such an evening or such and such a morning. So I know parishes have their own plans and dioceses have their own plans. All I'll be asking you to do is have a look at that. I think there's good stuff in it. I think it could work, because an awful lot of work was put into putting it together in a way that it could be run by ordinary people. You do not have to be a professional catechist. You do not have to be a professional facilitator to run the program. Okay, so the other initiative then, and it goes back to a point I was making earlier, it's called Practical Initiatives for Popular Moments. And I suppose it's based on the truth. Like if you put on that program in your parish, you announced and you promoted it really well that we're having a discussion program on the joy of love, would you get hundreds of people to come to it? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. Typically now, and there's only one man in the country who's broken this as far as I can see, and that's the last man you heard there, Harry Bowen. But typically, parishes succeed in gathering about 1% of the adult population, or dioceses succeed in gathering about 1% of the adult population in any year for formal adult religious education programs. So what these are is not an alternative. What these are is another way. Asking what are some of the important moments in the calendar year for people, and can we connect with those moments, and can we do something simple that communicates something of the joy of love? So for instance, February, what happens in February that's very popular? Valentine's is a religious feast, and one of the things Francis says in the joy of love, he says, is with time we recovered our religious feasts, he says. So what Valentine's is, do you know what's happening with Valentine's Day this year? Ash Wednesday, that's right. So the initiative in one of 14. And by the way, this is a menu. It's not meant that you're meant to do one every month. It's just that you're meant to look at the stuff and see, is there one of them things that had work in our parish? Right? So just to give the example of the Valentines, the initiative is called Thinking Outside the Chocolate Box. Right? And what it is it's vouchers. They are free. So, but a set of vouchers are delivered to every parish. And on the vouchers, there's a commitment. I will cook you a meal when you redeem the voucher. So, I go into the local shop in the parish the week before Valentine's, and I say, can I have the meal voucher? And they give me the meal voucher, and I give it to the wife. And then when she wants, she gives it back to me and I cook the meal. So there's another one that says, I'll go for a walk with you whenever you ask me to. And another one that says, let's have a conversation about when we first met. So the idea is actually to stimulate folk, to stimulate couples, to spend quality time together. And with all the vouchers, there are messages from Pope Francis on the joy of love. And how couples can show love to one another. So a bunch of them will arrive in your parish. And with them will be the promotional literature on the Thinking Outside the Chocolate Box. And the job of a small group in the parish will be simply this. How will we get the promotional literature out in the weeks ahead of Valentine's Day so that everybody in the parish knows about this initiative? And what shops, what places will we place the vouchers so that people would know where to go for them? So certainly you can place them in the church, but you can also place them in the post office. You can place them in the local shop. You know, it's just a matter of organising. So that's an example of a way of communicating some of the messages of the joy of love through a popular mode. Now, a lot of the people will be delighted to go for the voucher who wouldn't go next nor near the programme. Isn't that fair enough? So that's just, and there are 14 of those spread out over the year. And if I could give another example, at First Communion, there is a gift offered. Now, it's called the Cube of Love. And the World Meeting of Families is making 10,000 of those available free of charge to the parishes that look for them first. And after that, I think it'll cost you a couple of euros a go. And what it is, it's a toy that's given not just to the child that's making their first communion, but to the family. The toy is a cube that you construct and that the family play together by rolling, just like a dice. Except that instead of numbers 1 to 6 on the 6 sides, there are simple messages from the joy of love. And the game is families will throw the dice, and whatever message comes up, they try to live that message that day. Very simple. But again, the challenge would be for a parish to plan its First Communion service so as to include the gift of the cube, to include that in the ceremony, to explain to the families the significance of it, and to encourage them to play, to build the cube with their child, but also to play with the cube. So again, there'll be an awful lot of parents at the First Communion and family members who would be glad of the cube of love who mightn't go, but they'll still hear and they'll experience something of the message. So that's the idea in the in the 14, and they're running from now right through to Pentecost. So I won't go into any more detail on them. I'm anxious that you'd have a few minutes to chat about this. Yes, 1:15 now, so I'm just going to. So just that in the book, there's 2 pages given to each of the practical initiatives, and they cover the basic questions, like what is this initiative? How does it work in a parish? So at least 1, 2, 3, 4, these are the steps you have to take. What resources do you need? So it lists again where the resources are either online or where they're materially available. The resources don't cost anything. So it's a very much a to-do list. And why would you do that? It touches on that. Included in the, so that's that. And then the third booklet with these, and this is a critical one, and again it picks up on the point of formation, of equipping people. It's a facilitator's guide, and basically what it does is it explains both the 6-session conversation program, and it explains the practical initiatives or popular moments, and it shows how to organise them. It offers some background information on Francis, 10 things deep in his heart, and it also summarises the joy of love. So it's a handy guide to Francis, and it's a handy guide to the Amoris programme. And what dioceses are doing around the country, they're making their own decisions about making available training evenings, because it's structured that you get the training done of a midweek evening. So, and everything that you'd need to do the training is in this. There's a backup video with this, which is already available. So a diocese could organise, according as parishes wanted, its own training, or a parish could do that for themselves. And just what kind of folk are needed to do this? Like I'd asked earlier, do you have to be specialist in something or other? And the answer is no, unless you take having a Christian orientation as being specialist. Francis outlines some key gifts that are required for people to be effective missioners, and they're things that we might recognise in ourselves. That we're prepared to listen to people. It's not about telling people, sit down, shut up, we have something to tell you. That we treat people with respect and with empathy. We're not the superior beings, knowing things they don't know, living lives better than they're living, trying to bring them up to our standards. And are down to earth, able to relate to people and speak in a language they understand. I've done loads of theology myself, and I've spent half my life trying to recover from that. I love theology, but you just go funny in how you speak when you. Just for your information, and I'm finishing with this, there's also a schools program for primary schools and secondary schools, which is running in parallel to this. It's a 4-session program. It's been organised by the people who organised the Catholic Families Week. And you'll see up there just 4 elements in it, which will be happening anyway. Okay, I'll stop. I say I appreciate you'll be doing your own thing anyway. I'm just asking ye to have a look at the resources. You'll get them online. All of that stuff is online. And along with that stuff, there's a whole lot of other stuff online, like cartoons for children about Pope Francis, cartoons for adults about Pope Francis, and so on, and studio programs. So just for the sake of your parish, tune into what's available and make that known. So I'm going to invite you now, where you're sitting, just have a chat about, do you think any of those resources would be of use in your parish? In the meantime, I'm going to go down with my trolley. I'm going to leave 2 boxes of the actual materials on the floor, and I'd ask you, on behalf of your parish, pick up 1, not 2, and share them with whoever's sitting around you. But hold on to them at the end of the night, at the end of the session, and bring them home. Bring them home, and just consider back in your parish whether you could use them or not.